Then we
Well,
can
on.
So right now we are starting from Daf Mem Hayom Beis. We were middle of the sugya of Eved Vayvid Kachavim Haba al Bas Yisrael. If a Vlad Mams or Vlad Kosher, and so far the consensus has been the Hilchas Eved Kachavim beEved Haba al Bas Yisrael Havlad Kosher Bein Bipnuya Bein Beishes Ish. And the reason why Rav didn't want to take the guy for a son-in-law is because he was not as big a Talmud Chacham as Yeshua ben Nun. Right? That was the Maskana of the Gemara. So now we're up to Rava. That was Mr. Weiss brought up that there's a member by the name of a Yid by the name of Mori Baruch. He was Nisyachas after his mother because his father wasn't Jewish. Rava Akshrei of Mori Baruch. Rava gave his hechsher on Mori Baruch. Let's see what Rashi says about Mori Baruch. May Oived Kechavim Haba al Yisraelis. He was the child of a goy who was ba on a Yisraelis. Umanya beportion the Bava. Not only did Rava give him a hechsher and said he's not a mamzer, Rava appointed him to a position of authority. And we know that you're not allowed to appoint anyone to a position of authority in Klal Yisrael unless he's one of us. The Alvagav, the Amar Mar, Soim Tosim Alecha Melech, Mikerav Achecha, which means Kol Mesimois Shatem Mesim, any one that you put upon the tzibur should be Al Yu El Mikerav Achecha, has to be for one of our brethren. Nevertheless, he said, "Hi, Kivan the Imam Yisrael, since the mother of Rami was a Yisrael, Mikerev Achicha Karinan Bey. He's referred to as one of us, and he's eligible. He qualifies to be in a position of authority in Klal Yisrael." I'm sorry. In addition to the father, there were other skeletons, or that was a skeleton. All right. Oh, I mean, every leader has to have. That's right. That's right. Avdei, the Reb Chia Bar Ami, the servant of Reb Chia Bar Ami, Atfila lahu avedes kachavim l'shem intisa. He wanted to marry this goita, so he had her toivel, not l'shem gerus. He had her toivel. Rashi says l'shem nidas. So the question is, what is the status with this woman, and what is the status with her child that she conceived in this union? Reb Yosef, so Reb Yosef said, I can find a way to say that she's Jewish, and I can find a way to say that her daughter is going to be kosher. But how could I justify that she's Jewish? She didn't have a proper tefillah, l'shem geris. Zok Gemara, Kidr Abasi, Tamar Abasi, Mi loy tavla l'nedusa. She for sure tavla l'nedusa. If she is trying to be Jewish, she thinks she's Jewish, so she for sure would be tavling for her nida. So that clearly, that tefillah automatically is an expression of Judaism because she's tavling to comply with halacha. Such a tefillah also works to make her into a geiris. You're right, but she's acting like she's Jewish. Right? She was thinking that she was Jewish because he told her, "You're going to be my Jewish wife." So you're right. Technically, she has no chiyuv neither, but in her mind, from her perspective, she thinks she's Jewish. So therefore, she's toiveling for nida. But that's good enough of toiveling for Judaism to make her into Jew.
Why did he have to toivel her? She was doing it anyway.
Well, I guess he told her I want to marry you, so maybe toivel.
That's enough?
That's enough. And if you look at Rashi's Lashon, Rashi says,
He's a slave. So what is
well, now we have a question of Eved Habal Bas Yisrael, is the Vlad Mamzer or not? Right? The Barta is the next thing. But first we have to figure out how she became Jewish. So Rashi says over here, Yachilun Lachshuriba, Yoris Gemura. Even though her tefillah was not l'shem geirus, he told her to toivel because she was a nida. Zokt Rashi, the tefillas nida solkal l'shem geris, and Avigdor saying, good, it's not even a tefillas nida, it's a perception. It's her false perception that it's a tefillas nida. Why? A guy would never do it. So if she's doing it because she wants to comply with Judaism. A tefillah trying to comply with Judaism, that's enough of a tefillah to make her into a Gyaris. That was the chiddush of Rabasi. That's precisely the chiddush of Rabasi. Yeah, she has to have Kabbalah, some mitzvahs. So she must have had all that. Like this, and we're going to learn soon. You need a bezdin of 3. So where's the bezdin of 3? So the Mepharshim tell us she already had all that already. The only thing that was missing was the tefillah. So a tefillah l'shem nida, even though she's not a nida, works to make her into a Jew. So all the other parts of the puzzle were already completed.
Really, the issue here is she had the wrong das. When she was toivel, she had the das to
tell for Anida.
For Anida.
That's right.
Instead of being toivel for
correct. And Rabbi Asi saying that that's good enough.
Okay, it seems okay. That makes a lot more sense. Shot.
Now, I'm not sure what she was thinking. Like, he told her toil for your needers. So I'm not sure what, maybe she thought she was Jewish already. Maybe she thought that she's best and said she could toil, she's Jewish already. I'm not sure what she was thinking. But the tefillah component will be a good tefillah, even though she only was toiling. And how about the barta? How do we solve the problem of her daughter, who's the product of an Evet Shabal Bas Yisrael? So Gemara, for daddy old Ovid Gechav Evet Abal Bas Yisrael Havlat Kosher. So that's how he did it. Hahu, there was this gentleman, have a Karile Bar Maisa. Everyone said, "Oh, look at that guy. He is the son of a shiksa." Omer Rabasi said, "How can you call her a shiksa?" Mila Tavla Nidusa. She's toiled for Nida. If she toiled for Nida, even though she didn't go through the proper gears, she's considered a gears. So once again, this isn't speaking about a regular guy who's the son of a goiter. It means there was a woman who went through the whole process of gears, but didn't formally toivel. Because of that, they made fun of her son that he was the son of a goiter. So Rabasi, no, since she toiled Nidusa, that tefillah would have been good enough. Hahu the Karile.
This woman toiled regularly, and that is.
But she had to toivel Nidusa.
She toils every month, and that is indicative that she's been Megayer already.
You think it's a proof?
It's a proof that she's Megayer.
I don't think that's shot over here. I don't think that's shot, but let's see Rashi. Bok Ravasi. So Amr Bishmaitzi. Rashi said at the moment, which we're learning now, Hahudav a Karile Bar Me'isa. Shaloi Tavla Imoy L'Shem Geris. People were saying about this woman that she did not toivel L'Shem Geris. So that was the allegation. The allegation was not that she wasn't Jewish at all, that she never did her proper tefillah. And then Rabasi responded, Mila Tavla Nedusa, Alma Tfilas Nida, Sol Kalol L'Shem Geris. So that's Rashi's first shot, which is the shot that Rashi likes. Okay. Zog to Gemara Viter. Hahudav a Karile Bar Me'isa. Once again, the same thing. They said his father never toivel L'Shem Geris. Amr B'Shum Levi, Mila Tavel L'Karyai. Did he not toivel for his carry? So therefore, you can assume he toiveled. They build big tires out of here. The first thing they build out of here is that it's not so pashut to rely on Tisha Kabin, because who said he toiveled for carry? Maybe he just washed himself with Tisha Kabin. Wow. From the fact that Rabbi Shmuel Levi was 100% sure that he toiveled for his carry, tells us that could be you need to feel it. Amar Rab Chama Bar Guya Amar Rab. Fascinating situation here. There was a guy who owned an Eved Kenai. Now this Eved Kenai that was owned by the guy must have been a smart guy. And he said, when I come to become an Eved Kenai by a Jew, it comes along with being Mekabel certain mitzvahs. So what he did was, he said, once I'm going halfway, I'm going to go all the way. The Eved, after the Jew paid for him, before he had a chance to make the proper kinyan on him, which is toiveling him, L'Shem Avdos, he quickly toiveled by himself with the express kavanah of being a full Jew. So the halacha is, Kana Atzma Ben Chayr. This Eved is no longer an Eved. He becomes a Ben Chayr because his tefillah L'Shem becoming a Yisrael makes him into a Yisrael in Gansen. Now the Rishonim say, of course, he still owes the cost that his Adon paid for him, but he himself is not going to have the shackles of Avos upon him. My time, it's similar to a tuition committee.
Yeah.
My time, what is the reason? And here is where we're learning a huge chiddush. When you own an Evet Kanani, you own his body. You actually own the person. But a goy, we're going to bring a riot from Psukim, can never own another goy. So the goof of the Evet did never belong to his previous master. My dekanile, and this compromised ownership that the goy had in this Evet, that's all he could sell to the Jew. He cannot sell the Jew more than he himself possesses. So he's selling a shibud, some type of shibud on the Maisi Yadayim of this guy. But the kiva and the kadam v'taval, l'shem ben chayrin. But since this Evet jumped into the mikveh and toivel l'shem ben chayrin, in other words, for a full geiros, afkoy l'shibute, it will actually take away the shibud. So if it was a full ownership, toiveling l'shem ben chayrin wouldn't impact the full ownership of his master. But if it's merely the fact that there's a lien on him to provide services, then becoming a Jew will be paikeya the shibud. Where do you find such a thing that some higher purpose can null and void a prior shibud, a prior lien? So the Gemara gives us several examples. K'derava, Dama Rava hektish, chametz, shichur, afkin mideshib. Hektish means, imagine you have a shar, which is royu to be brought as a korban, but it's chulin, and you owe somebody money, and you told that person you're going to be able to collect from this shar. So you made this shar in a poitiki, you've designated it as an item that will pay back if you don't come up with the cash. So the creditor has ownership in it, some type of schus in this animal. And then you make it into a korban. You say, Arezu oil. You make it into a korban. The fact that it got Kedushas Aguf blows off the shibud. The shibud is no longer there. Chametz. What if you have chametz? You have expensive whiskey, and you use that as collateral on a choy. The moment the 6th hour comes and it becomes aser bano, you're supposed to burn it, and it's no longer shubid to the person who was owed the money. And v'shichur is exactly our case. I'm sorry, it's not our case. Shichur, Rashi says, if you have an eved and you designated your eved as something that your creditor can collect from, and you free the eved, by freeing the eved, the lien that your creditor has dissolves. So you see that concept that taking on a higher kedusha will eliminate a shibud. It wouldn't be able to eliminate ownership, but a lien it's able to eliminate. You're telling me that kedusha will remove the shibud. I'll show you otherwise. Bluria became a giyaris. When she did that, she had to transfer all of her havadim that she had from her non-Jewish ownership to her new Jewish ownership, because she's changing identities. So she has to transfer over all of her accounts to her new identity, including the ownership of her avodim. And her avodim were smart, and what they did was shekadmu avadel, they toiveled even before she toiveled and became a Jew. So once she becomes a Jew, she would develop a full ownership on the avodim. As a non-Jew, she only has a lien on them to be entitled to their ma'is yadayim, to their services. So her avodim were smart, and they toiveled l'shem Yisrael before she did. The tovel l'fanel, uvamais l'fnei chacham. And when this came, I guess she just became Jewish, and then right away she's already running to Din Torah to deal with complications of becoming Jewish. But when they told her, "Kanu atzim b'nei chayrin," I say, "Sorry, they're now free." She said, "I don't want to be Jewish anymore." I said, "Sorry, too late. You're Jewish and you've lost your avodim." Of course, they're mechuyev to pay you for their value, but they are now b'nei chayrin. But the psak was made only because of the tablu l'fanel. because they toiveled before she became Jewish. Lifanel in lacharei aloi. Had she toiveled already and had she been Jewish, they would not have been able to do this. So the question is, why are we saying earlier? Why did Rabbi Chaim bar Goya Amarav say that a Evet could toivel before the Jew takes ownership of him and go free? Here, had she already toiveled, had she been Jewish already, even though they still only belonged to the old her, who was a goy, who only had a shibud in her, still, you see, they wouldn't be able to go free. So you have a proof from the psak of the mice of glorious Agiyaris that in fact, if you're buying an evet from a goy, even if he toivel l'shem ben chayrin, you wouldn't go free. Amarava depends. Lifaneha, if they toivel before her, bein bistam bein b'mefurish. Even if they didn't say specifically, we are toiveling because we want to go free, even if they didn't say that, since they toiveled before she became Jewish, it will free them. But la'acharel, but if she already became a Jew, then if they stamazoi toivel, it doesn't relinquish her ownership of them. But only if it's b'mefurish. If they were toivel, like our Gemara says at the bottom of the base, the tovel l'shem ben chayrin. If these avodim had a specific avodah to toivel l'shem ben chayrin, they wanted to be ois evet, and they wanted to be a Yisrael gomer, that's when it will work. They stam loy. But once she's a giyoris, if they stam toivel, they don't go free unless they specify. And in the case of luya giyoris, they stam toivel, but they didn't specify.
How can what argument can get into the isn't involved here? A boy can just toivel the same years.
No, so this must have been, well, on the Eved, yes, because an Eved it's automatic.
Every connecting to an Eved cannot to.
No, because what's going to happen is we're about to learn when you buy an Eved, so you don't need Besdin to make the Eved take on the mitzvahs, right? So she once she toivels, but once she becomes Jewish, she now has to take ownership of her avodim the Jewish way.
I understand that,
and they got out of it before.
Before she toiveled.
Correct.
So you have a guy who toivels L'Shem Geiros without any supervision, without any rishus, and they can become Jewish.
Well, are you talking about them? Maybe they did some type of supervision. Did they stop toivel?
The errors in the Mishnah's insurance, it just costs a lot of money.
I hear. So I'm not sure the exact conditions upon which they toiveled, but it says Fishen Gerim, so they quickly did a Geirus. I mean, there must have been a guy who just goes to the mikveh doesn't become Jewish, right? There's got to be a bezin involved. So then maybe they quickly did that. Maybe they quickly went to a bezin and then they toivel. And maybe the bezin wasn't going to toivel them. The bezin just took them up to that point, but had to deal with blurs first, and then they jumped the gun. The question is, does errors and omissions insurance for the bezin cover such an eventuality? That's a good question. So Zog the Gemara, Amar Rav Avia, Lo Yishanu ela b'lekeich min ha'ovet b'cha. This only works, this whole issue that they can get themselves to be free, if you bought them from an ovet b'cha, because their kinyan, the kinyan, the ownership that the goy who was the prior owner of this servant, his ownership was limited to their ma'aseh yadayim. But if a Jew is buying the goy for himself, so if a goy comes to me and says, I want to sell myself to you to become your slave, so there you're writing your own slavery contract. You're not taking over an existing diluted contract. When you're buying it from a goy, you're just buying his diluted contract, which is only a kinyan of their ma'aseh yadayim. But if a goy is selling himself to you, then you're getting the real authentic avdus, and then gufei kanya. Then you're actually kanya the gufa evet. And then he wouldn't be able to get out so easily. Tichsiv, the gam ibnei atoshav magarim imochem ehem tiknu. From the goyim who live amongst you, you should buy them as servants. And we darshan atem kanya mehem. You can buy servants from their population. V'lehem kanya mikem. They cannot buy servants from your. The Torah doesn't recognize a Jew being an eved to a goy. V'lehem kanya zamizeh. And the Torah doesn't recognize a goy buying a goy. V'loyhem kanya michem. So let's go back to analyze. The Brisa said v'loyhem kanya michem. Lamai, what does it mean they can't be kanya from you? Are you telling me that a Jew can't sell himself to a goy? The pasuk in the Torah directly discusses a Jew selling himself to a goy. Can a goy not buy a Jew to at least get his ma'aseh his services? So the pasuk discusses a case where a Jew sold himself to a guy. So there has to be some level of sale, and that would be at the minimum. It would be his ma'aseh yadayim. So the Jew is selling the rights to his ma'aseh yadayim to the guy. So that for sure is allowed. That for sure works. So that cannot be what the pasuk of Begam Mibnei Teshevim is coming to exclude. And alav legufei, or the pasuk that says a guy can sell to a yid, but a yid cannot be sold to a guy, or a guy cannot be sold to a guy. That's referring to a kinyan haguf. Alav legufei kamar, alav legufei kama. The kamar achmana adam koinim mehem afilu gufei. You can buy from a guy even his actual guf. You'll actually own him. Who said that you could stop be kind of the guy? Maybe it's Davka Bikaspa with Tefillah. Let's see Rashi. Ema Bikaspa with Tefillah. L'shum Abdus. If you gave money to the guy and you told them L'shum Abdus, who the Amar Achman Alikli? Maybe only under those circumstances can you be kind of a guy. Avalam Kadam V'Taval Hashem Ben Chayrin Hachanami Ben Chayrin. You're telling me that since you're buying a goy legufei, so you own him completely, and therefore you wouldn't be able to toivel the shem geras. Who said? Maybe you only own him that way once you paid and you did tefillah, but before you did tefillah, maybe you don't fully own him legufei, and maybe he could still quickly toivel the shem geras and go free. So from our kasha, it's a kasha, but it's very answerable. So at the end of the day, when you're buying from a goy, since the only ownership that the goy had was for Paris, for ma'aseh yadayim, therefore, if he chaps a ride in toivos l'shem ben chayrin, you can't do anything about it. But if you're buying it through another Jew, where you own his guf, then he wouldn't be able to do that. Okay, so to Gemara weiter. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, when you do a tefillah on a eved l'shem avdus, you have to make it obvious from the Maisa that this is L'Shem Avos. Because somebody asked me earlier, I don't understand. You can do anything you want, but if the guy's kavanah, if the Evet's kavanah is L'Shem Geirus, so how can you stop that? How can you control his kavanah? The teretz is, actions speak louder than words. So if you make this tefillah into a tefillah of Avdus, it doesn't make a difference what kavanah he has. The fact is, the tefillah is a tefillah of Avdus. How do you make it into a tefillah of Avdus? You got to push him down and hold him in the water. Rashi says, "L'takve b'mayim" means when you're toiveling him. It's a religious type of tefillah because we know that when an Evet Knani becomes an Evet Knani by a Yid, he's becoming partially Jewish. He has to accept certain mitzvahs. Tzarich sheyit kefenu. You have to chap him. You have to grab him and control him. Laseis alav oil malacha b'mayim. In the water, you have to make him do abdus type of things to demonstrate that this tefillah is not his wanting to toivel. We're forcing it upon him, and he's doing malacha for me. He's doing avodah. He's acting like an eved during this process. Kadesh they nearest tefillas abdus. It has to be very visibly obvious that this is not a tefillas geiris. This is a tefillah of abdus. Shafilu yomer hu l'shem ben chayrin. Even if you said no, I had in mind the Shem ben Chayrin, it wouldn't help. Like Kanat ben Chayrin, because clearly this is a tefillah of Avos. Therefore, his words don't count. His actions speak louder than words, and this is a tefillah of him subjecting himself to accepting Avos. Kihayde Minyamin Avde de Rabashi. Minyamin was the servant of Rabashi. Boilat Bulay. Rabashi was buying him. I guess Rabashi was buying him from a goy, so he wanted to toivel him to make him into a proper Evet Knani. So Mosrin the Halayu LeRavinu LeRabacha Rava. I guess Ravinu LeRabacha Rava had a tvila business. They processed avodim, so they were like an Evet broker. They were like they like the company that's like a title company, the title transfer company. So they did the process. Amalu, he warned them, you better have errors on the emissions insurance. The minaychu kabayisle. If you don't do this right and the transfer doesn't go through properly, I'm going to sue you guys. So you better do it right. So what was their process that they did? They could be sure that it would be done properly and it would be effective. Is Ramule, our Risab et Savari, they put a like a noose around his neck, like a Jesse Smollett. They put that around his neck. I'm sorry, a leash, right? And you,
They want to kill him. They want to leave him somewhere.
yeah, you know Jesse Smollett is. He's the guy who didn't have a noose put around his neck, although he claimed that he did. And then, Arfule, they first made it loose, this noose, or you could call it a leash, and then Vitzimtzumule, and then a leash is more appropriate a term to use because a leash shows servitude. A noose means I want to kill you. So really, a leash is the right word. So first they made it loose, and then Vitzimtzumule, then they made it tight. Why? Arfule, first they made it loose. They had to make sure that the water would get everywhere so that it's a kosher tefillah. But then Tzimtzum, they had to tighten it up. They had to demonstrate while he's being toivel that it's avdus. So this was a good enough of a demonstration that clearly the tefillah shem avdus, he's toiveling with a tight leash around his neck, and that wasn't enough. They were uber careful. And Bahadi the dollar ratio Mimaya, as his head is coming out from the water, Anchele Zulta the Tina Areshe. They had a bucket that was full of cement. They put that on his head, which is how people carried things in those days. They told him, Zilm Amti Levemarach. So as he's coming out of the water, he's already in servitude, performing duties on behalf of his Adai. So that was a fail-safe way of making sure that the transition from Goy to Eved Knaini would be there without a lapse, without any chance of the Eved going free. Very good. They cemented his Abbas. Okay, Gavalti. Omerlei, the only thing that comes to mind, when I think of this Gemara, is Rabbi Brunner coming out of the mikveh with his wet hat. That's definitely not a typical tefillah l'shem gears. You know the story of Rabbi Brunner. Omerlei, Rav Papa told
There's
Rabbi.
a better story. There's a better when
sorry?
when Shia Greenfield was the shamus in the Gouda, we had the old mikveh and the old shul. He walked in there once, and somebody, I don't know what the story was. There's some woman decided to toivel for a gear. So he walked in, her husband was there. He almost fainted. He went nuts. You don't remember that story?
No, I don't.
Sounds exactly like this Gemara. Some guy brought his chicks into the mikveh of the toilet. Is that what happened?
That sounds like Omerlei Rav Papa Rabbi. I only want to know one thing. I only want to know one thing. I have one question. Did they put $5 in the pushkin? Amalei Rav Papa. Rav Papa told Rav.
Anyway, I might have made a mistaken story. It might have been he was toiveling and she accompanied him. She was just standing on the outside. I can't remember.
Okay, the next thing I know, she was in the car waiting for him. I see already what's happening here.
The first one sounded better though.
What's that?
The first story, it sounded better. I had everybody's attention.
That's right. Chazimar. Look, Hani Devei Papa Barabba. We know that Papa Barabba was a very wealthy man. It was a very wealthy family. So what they used to do is when Goyim weren't able to afford paying the head taxes to the king, what they would do is they would pay the head tax on behalf of Goyim who were unable to pay. And then they said, with that purchase, since they paid the head tax, they took these Goyim as servants because they bailed them out. Otherwise, they would have been taken into custody. So the question is, this Abdus that they created, what status does it have? Kinafki, when we're ready to let these people go, will they require a stark shikhr or like? So is this a real Abdus or not? Amr Lay, he told him, Eichesh Chivi le Amar Lechu. Eichesh Chivi never told you. I assume Eichesh Chivi is the name of a person. No, what does Eichesh Chivi mean? Oh, so what does that mean? If I would have died, you wouldn't have known? So it's good I'm alive? Okay, so I mean, it's good I'm still alive, because if I wasn't alive, you would have never known the answer to this. It was a good thing you discussed it with me, because otherwise I would have died. Okay, if I would have died, I would have never been able to tell you this. It's good you asked me this before I died. This is what Reb Sheshes said about this idea. Muharkayu Tahani, their chasima. Rashi said Muharkayu means chaysman shalelu. In other words, their essence is where the taps of the malkamah is in the box of the king. In other words, yes, they belong to the king, and by you paying the head tax, you're actually buying them, and they belong to you. Umal Kamar, and the king said, Mandalayoyev karga, if someone is karg and he doesn't pay the karga, mishtabid lemandayoyev karga. He is going to have to be mishubed. The king said that he becomes a servant to the one who pays on his behalf.
Yeah. Not a goy can't sell another goy into Avos. So how is paying the head tax?
I guess that purchased the king's rights, and then they probably had to do tefillah. They probably had to do tefillah afterwards.
Or they only have the right to the malacha.
Could be the only right to malacha. Yeah, maybe they only have the right to malacha. They still have to give a star shechar. Okay. Reb Chia bar Abba ikla lagav. Reb Chia bar Abba came to the city of Gavla. Chaza, he saw the noise Yisrael the ba'abra megerim. He saw that there were women Rachman al who were pregnant from gerim, but these weren't fully baked gerim. Shemalu v'loitav. They had mila but not fila, meaning they haven't yet completed their gerish process. So now,
I think the tefillah would have been easier to do.
You have a good point, but technically, this is an oived kachavim haba bas Yisrael. Now, what else did he see there? Because of Chamer the Yisrael, he saw yain that was not mavushal. The mazgi oived kachavim v'shasi Yisrael. The goyim were diluting it and serving it, and the Yidden drank it in the city of Gavla. So here now we have a chash of stam yain. Now Rashi says they didn't actually touch the wine, so it wouldn't be yain nesach. But the fact that they handled it, maybe they should answer it anyway. And the chazat termusim are a type of legumes that need a lot of cooking. The shalki avoid this oivdei kachavim. The goyim cooked them. V'achli Yisrael. Once again, it can be a shaila bishalakum. But v'loy amar lehu v'loy midi. But Reb Chia bar Abba didn't say anything. But Ashla Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, I guess someone told over to Rabbi Yochanan what was going on in this city. Amalei told him this is major problems. Say the hachris, go right away and announce. Al b'nei and shem mamzerim. Their children are mamzerim. Al yena mishum yain nesach, and their wine is also to drink because it's yain nesach. Val turmuson mishum bishula ovedicham, and their turmuson are not allowed to be eaten because of bishalakum. Why are we answering al bishalakum? Lefnei she'enam lefi she'enam b'nei Torah. It's not b'nei Torah. So clearly this isn't b'ikar adin, because if it was b'ikar adin, no matter who you are, you're not allowed to eat it. So this is merely only a gzeira, something of gzeira that he was making that only applies to non-b'nei Torah, I guess, because they wouldn't be able to distinguish between what's really a problem and what's not a problem. And now the Gemara elaborates. Al b'nei shen mamzerim, it's Rabbi Yochanan Tameid Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Lo'ilam ein ger at shiyom alviyid. Gerus is not chal until the full process is complete, mila and tefillah, for a male, that is.
It's equal backwards. I mean, no, sorry, I was going back to the Bishul Akum. Bishul Akum is usher to prevent
Mixing with them.
them.
And they already did.
They already did it. Like, it seems like it's out of order, you know?
Maybe that's why he was strict with them. Maybe that's why he was stricter with them.
Be stricter with them because they already did it?
Because they weren't fearing the problem.
So we're going to have to, okay.
No, so why do you do meal of a fourth tefillah? You think you do tefillah, I mean, get the mitzvah of the
What is done? How is Gerus done? Is the meal done first or the tefillah?
Not sure there is a meal.
What do you have? An oral tabling? How could that be a tefillah? Maybe first you gotta be.
We all get born without.
No, we don't go to the mikveh.
But isn't the mikveh like being born? Isn't that like?
Right, you would think you do the mikvah first, and then you do the bila.
Is that what I'm doing?
That's it. That's yimo vehicle.
So it sounds like the Bila goes first. Chivan the loy tovel, and since they haven't toveled yet, so they haven't completed the process, Ovid Gachavim, they're goyim. Lama Rabba Rabba Chalam Rabbi Yechanan, Ovid Gachavim Ve'evid Abal Bas Yisrael, Avad Mamzer. So that's why the blood of Mamzer. What about the wine? While Yeim Mishum Yain Nesach, it's not really Yain Nesach, because the goyim didn't pour it Lavod Yazar. They just handled the wine. And we say Leich Amrin Nazira. We tell the Nazir, go away, stay far away from a vineyard. Schar, go around Lakarmel Sikna. Stay far away. So we're so concerned about Yain Nesach, we don't even allow the goyim to handle the wine at all, and that's why he outlawed it. What are you trying to say? If they were b'nei Torah, they would have been allowed to eat these turmusim, which are seemingly bishalakim. Anything that does not need cooking, like an apple or a peach or a pear, no problem with bishalakim. That's why you can buy canned apples and canned peaches and canned pears and other canned fruit, because you can eat them raw anyway. So the bishul doesn't make them into bishalakim. Frank the Gemara about turmus, this particular legume, it cannot be eaten. It cannot be eaten raw. Nevertheless, so there should be bishul of. So why are we saying that it's only a chumrah? It wasn't really bishul of. So Gemara Yochanan Kidich Lish the Svirle. He was like the other lashon. Number of Shmuel by Rav Yitzchak b'shmei the Rab. Kol shein oila al shulchan melachim. Any type of food that would normally not be served to a king, lachal boy as a pass to eat along with his bread. Ein boy mishum bishul of. And the king would never eat this tormah stuff. I guess it's a low grade type of food. So therefore, since he wouldn't eat it, therefore, dafka v'tayim on the enim of the Torah, they wouldn't be able to make this distinction between if it's oila shulchan melachim or not. B'nei Torah shari, because they can make that distinction. If I'm not mistaken, the reason why we can eat tuna fish, even though it's cooked by a guy, it's not Bishul Yisrael, is because it's not oila shulchan melachim, right? Although if you went to a big chashuv and rebbe, Shalosh time, you'll see these big, beautiful tuna platters. But I guess I don't know. I guess you won't find it by a king. I mean, Biden would eat anything. I mean, you see Biden eats ice cream in the store.
No,
I don't know if he's a king anymore.
I don't know. Now also we eat tuna raw. So I think that changes things.
Well, we don't eat all tuna raw. You're saying so it doesn't need bishul. I hear. But I think the reason why, I mean, now you could buy tuna that's bishul Yisrael. But before, the good old days of Starkist, when no one bought Dagam tuna, everyone bought Starkist. Those days, it was all about the reason why we ate it was because of bishul Yisrael. And because it was not a Lushon Nachum. So because of that, Dagim had to come up with another gimmick to make sure people buy. And they call it dolphin proof. Because from time to time, the dolphin will get caught in the nets of the tuna. And now you could be eating dolphin.
Daryl White had the whole story. And he was when he was the Ramakshar with the OU, that they realized that they were catching the bycatch, dolphins a bycatch. And it was the OU that said that they aren't going to allow it. And that was how the whole thing came out. He said they threw out millions of cans of tuna.
But why wouldn't it be bottled right? Because it's chopped up. Dolphin or tuna? I hear. Interesting. Tother about.
You can't be volatile unless you're they knew it was in there. They want to pay the expense of removing it.
I hear.
I mean, lechatchila to use such a head, that's like pretty bad. To know lechatchila every single Shabbos you're going to have traffic shows that are called to the word.
It can't be volatile.
It'll be right. There's halacha in the Torah.
True.
How do they do that?
But to use it as a lechatchila, that's what I'm saying.
They're careful not to catch. They changed the net. The kind of net they were using to catch the dolphins. Now they're careful using that allows dolphins.
Tother about. Ger shemol v'lo tofa. So now we're getting into the rules of what is absolutely required for the gers. So what if a ger got mila and didn't get fila? Is he considered Jewish? Rabbi Elazar Eimer, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer Eimer, harei ze ger. He's a ger. How do I know that fila is not ma'akib? Shekein vatzinu ba'avisenu shemolu v'latov. You find by our fathers they had mila and not tefillah. Where do you see that? So Rashi says in the second wide line, Bimei Moshe, in the times of Moshe, Kishayatu mi Mitzrayim, when Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, Yatu mechlal b'nei Noach lekabel atayra ulekabel pnei hashchit. That's when they became Eden. So once again, the Lublina strikes again, because it's very interesting. I heard over a beautiful thing. Normally, if someone is mavatla a mitzvah say, it's very kal, right? And maybe you bring a carbon oila or kapara, but there's two mitzvahs assays that if you violate them, you're chay of kares. Which are these? Pesach and Mila. Why? Because I believe it's the Shemish Shmuel wants to say, it's because Pesach night was the time where we were transitioning from non-nationhood to nationhood. We became Klal Yisrael, we became Avdei Hashem the night of the Seder. And the night of the Seder, what was there? Dam Mila and Dam Pesach. Dam Mila and Dam Pesach were the two things that proclaimed our transition from servants of Paroi to Avdei Hashem. If someone is mevatel such two important things, it's where we became Avdei Hashem. This transition that we're talking about between one status to another status, that's why there's a chi of chorus, because it's such a serious thing. What's that? That's right. Right. It couldn't be that night because they wouldn't have traveled. But there was Damila involved before. Yeah.
That was the blood that
They put on the.
No, the Paros, they thought that they saw that the dam of the Mila happens in the Midbar, right? That was what the astrologers.
So that's the dam that they were referring to.
How many days before the departure did they actually have Mila?
Oh, had Mila
After they departed? They had Mila in the Midbar.
It says, yeah, b'mei Moshe kishayotzu miMitzrayim, v'yotzu mechlal b'nei Noach, l'kabel atayr, l'kabel b'nei Shechina. So it could be the Mila was in the midbar after that. No, they can't, because how could they eat the carbon Pesach? The first carbon Pesach, they must have done Mila in the tribe.
Yeah, so they did. So they had, so the carbon Pesach was Pesach night?
It was the night before they left.
No. They did have Mila a night before they left.
No, the Mila came a week before maybe.
A week before?
I don't know, maybe they did it before. Lab Dafka did it that day. Okay.
They had 2 weeks time to do it.
Can you imagine how many bagels and lox they sold that week in Mitzrayim? All those versions.
I remember somebody telling me that it was a tremendous show of faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked them to have Mila and do the carbon Pesach, which is going to antagonize the Egyptians, so antagonize the
While you're
Egyptians.
weak.
While you're weak, this is what I'm asking you to do.
The Baruch Hashem worked out okay. Okay, next. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. Now, what about Tovo V'loimol? What about Tefillah by itself? Rabbi Yeshua Omer Harei Zager. That also works. Shekein Matzinu B'imois Shetovo V'loimol. How do you know the women didn't maul? They didn't maul because what exactly are they going to maul? They're not Muslims, right? And how do you know that they must have tovel? The Gemara says later, because if they didn't tovel, what did they do? They must have done something. That's how we know that they tovel.
What a great raya.
What do you mean? It's the same raya that Moshe was a chassidish and he went in Ashtramal. Because if I ate to Moshe and Moshe ever left without Ashtramal, not possible. So it's a very good raya.
No, it says the art school actually says that they were more the night before they left.
Mamish the night before, the night of the Korban Pesach?
It says the Rambam saying that.
Wow.
You don't need the art, don't shy my approval.
Okay, well, so Zok the Gemara weiter. The Chacham says no. Tavo v'loy mal, mal v'loy tavo, ein ger at yom avit. You need both. So it's a machlokes if you only need Mila, if you only need Tefillah, or if you need both. Fact of Rabbi Yeshua Nami Neila Payavos. Rabbi Yeshua who said that Tefillah without Mila is good. What about the Ovis? The Ovis has Mila without Tefillah. So how could you say that you don't need Mila? Rabbi Lazar holds you don't need Tefillah. Nami Neila Payavos. You see, you need Mila.
How do we know the others didn't have Tefillah?
It doesn't say anywhere that they have Tefillah.
You don't know that they didn't.
The Gemara on base is going to elaborate on that one. Yeah. The chitema ain't done in after Mashiach after. If you could tell me, you can't bring me a raya that just because the women didn't do Mila, that Mila is not necessary. The women didn't do Mila because they can't do Mila. So you can't bring me a raya from there. Latanya, Rabbi Eliezer holds done in after Mashiach after. Where do you see that? Because the Bible said, Minayin lePesach doiros. Once again, the Lublina strikes again. Minayin lePesach doiros. She'ein ba elam minachul. How do you know that the carbon Pesach that we bring in from year to year, you cannot do it with Meiser money? So you have to use pure chulin money to buy your carbon Pesach. Because Nemar Pesach b'Mitzrayim. It says about the carbon Pesach in Mitzrayim, but never Pesach b'Doros. The Torah talks about Pesach b'Doros. Ma Pesach hamar b'Mitzrayim ein ba elam minachulin. The Pesach Mitzrayim only came from chulin. It couldn't have come from Meiser money because there was no such thing as Meiser money in those days. Pesach hamar l'Doros ein ba elam minachulin. On that, Rabbi Kiva said, what type of raya is that? Rabbi Kiva, you can't bring me a raya, you can't use Meiser money because they didn't use it by Pesach Mitzrayim. There was no Meiser money by Pesach Mitzrayim. But Rabbi Lezer says, no, Rabbi Lezer holds Donin after me, after. Rabbi Lezer said, even though it would have been impossible to have Meiser at the time of Pesach Mitzrayim, raya Gedoili, the Nil Metemen, we could learn from it. So I Shver Rabbi Lezer, how could you tell me that you don't need tefillah? By a woman, you need tefillah. Ella, you have to say. I'm sorry, I think I said it exactly the opposite. Rabbi Lezer said, Rabbi Lezer Harei Zager is mol v'lo tovel. That's right. Mila alone. So he also you don't need tefillah. It's Gemara, frank Gemara. Ella, you have to say, v'toval v'lo mol. If there was only tefillah and not mila, kula amalei pligi demahadi. Everybody has to agree that it works because done in after me after, and the women were able to be megayer with tefillah only. Key pligi. So where is the machlokes? The mol below table. The whole shaylas of mila alone does geris. Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yalef always that it does it. Yeshua, but always nami tefillah hava. Chaim tefillah. So now this addresses what you said. How do you know that there was no tefillah by the avos? So to be sure there was tefillah there as well. Minolei. How do I know that they actually did have tefillah by the avos? Midchsiv it says leichel by Matan Torah to go to the nation, the kidashtem ayoyim u'macher, and they have to make themselves pure. The chibsus and they even have to do tefillah on their begadim. Umah b'makom shein ton kibus madach by carry where there's no chiyuv. There's no chiyuv to wash your clothing. Your clothing don't become tamei. Nevertheless, ton tefillah, you need to do tefillah. Makom sheton kibus by Matan Torah, which they were becoming Yidden there. That's when they were becoming Gerim. Ein edin sheton tefillah. Surely you should need tefillah. Zok Gemara, you don't have a raya because you're trying to build a whole parsha about the fact that they had to wash their clothing because you're assuming that washing their clothing was to be matayir their clothing from tumah. It had nothing to do with that. The Dilma Nekiyas Ba'alma. The reason why they were commanded to wash their clothing is to take stains out. It's not ba'kovid to be mekabel b'tayra in stained clothing, but it's not good tumah to tayra. So therefore, you don't have a raya. I'm sorry. So you want to say from there to mean tefillah because Ella mehacha. Maybe you have a raya from a different place that they took. It says vayikach Moshe es Adam vayizrek ala'am. Moshe took the blood of the carbon and he spritzed it on the nation. Ugamiri, we know there's halacha everywhere in karbanis. The eina zabul tefillah. We never spritz dam unless there's tefillah. So that's how we know for sure Klal Yisrael did tefillah. But Rabbi Lezer they didn't do tefillah because it's not mentioned in the Torah explicitly that they did tefillah. Rabbi Yeshua tefillah be'imois minolam. How does Rabbi Yeshua know that there was tefillah by imois? It doesn't say anywhere. So Kamar Svarahu in Cain ba man nichnas utachas kamfei yishchina. If you're not going to say they toivel, well then what else did they do? Amar Abchi bar Abba Amar B'Yechid. The oilam ain't a ger. The person cannot become a ger achiyomo until he first gets mila b'yitbol and the toilets. Pshita, it's pashit. Yachid b'rab malach karab. We just learned on number aleph a three-way machlokes, right? Rabbi Yeshua held mila and Rabbi Lezer held tefillah, and the chum said both. So we should pass like a chum that you need both. So the chachamim is not a rabbin. So we need to tell you to pass like the chachamim because the chacham is really a shittas yachid. Man chachamim Rabbi Yosy. Chachamim is just the Shittas Yochid of Rabbi Yossi. Titania, Haresha Bav Omar, Malti Veloy Tavalti. What if someone comes to Bezdin and says, I already got a bris, but I didn't toivel it? So the lacha is, Matbilanoi Toyu Mabakach. We toivel him and there's not a problem. Watch shot, we toivel him, there's not a problem. If in fact we don't trust him, if he's not a yid, so his bris is not a good bris. If his bris is not a good bris, you need to do mila and tefillah, right? So, but Rashi Shema Aravi Mo, maybe he's an Arab who has a bris, maybe he's a Gavoini. How do you know? How do you know that he did a bris l'shem bris? You make a toughest on bris, yeah. So vibalt. The Tanakama says or Trabuda. Trabuda said no, just toivel. That proves that Trabuda holds you don't even need mila. Obviously, all you need is tefillah, so we're not concerned with the mila.
Why does he say to
I'm sorry.
If you don't need to toivel, then why?
No, Trabuda holds it's only tefillah that affects gerus, not mila. So therefore, if he says he maled already, we don't really care. It's irrelevant. Rabbi Yossi, no, ain't not tefillah. You can't toivel. Why can't you toivel him? Because maybe his bris is not good, and you have to do bris first. Okay, it seems very much that you have to do the bris first, right? Lefichach, therefore, Dr. Rabbi Yossi, Lefichach, therefore, like Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, matbilin ger b'Shabbos divrei Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you could be toivel a ger on Shabbos. Why? The Rashi Lefichach, Hoy Rabbi Yehuda b'chad sagi. Since according to Rabbi Yehuda, one of them is enough. Therefore, matbilon b'Shabbos ger shemol esmo. If a guy did a proper milah on Friday, so we know it was a good milah, and now we want to come toivel on Shabbos, you'll let him toivel. You know why? Because v'chimat b'lei b'shabbata lei misak negavra. When aren't you allowed to toivel? That's if that's going to make him into a yid. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, milah alone is enough, and tefillah alone is enough. So since milah alone is enough and tefillah alone is enough, that's why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if a ger came and tells us that he had milah, and we know it's true, we know he had a proper milah, so he's really a ger already. So therefore, you can let him toivel on Shabbos because it's not really doing anything. Because then the tefillah is making him into a yid. Then the tefillah would be making him into a yid, and that's a tikkun gavra. That's right.
Not a yid, but actually it's still anyway.
So the tefillah is being misaken gavra. So you want to know? So it doesn't say who toivel is matpila nicer. It's master their matpilim. So I guess from his perspective, there's no isser, but from their perspective, there's an isser. That's a good point. It's a very good point. The shaila is, how can anyone go to the mikveh on Shabbos of his tummy? Why isn't that misaken or nirek misaken? So the halach is, it looks the halach. The reason why we're not concerned nowadays is because it looks like he's just trying to bathe and cool himself off. But I guess becoming tar is not really a tikkun. It has to be that becoming tar is not really a tikkun, and we just have to make sure that it doesn't look like it's being misaken. Okay, Tosfos does speak about it. Let's go back to over here. So Rabbi Yossi holds lefichach matbilan ger b'Shabbos according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi ein matbilan. Why? Because the tefillah would be what's making him into a ger, and that wouldn't be enough. So you see clearly from Rabbi Yossi said that even though he already had milah, you still need a tefillah. So you see, it's the shita of Rabbi Yossi who holds that you need both, and therefore it's not pashut that Allah is like Rabbi Yossi because he's not a rabbin. So the Gemara have to tell us that we pass like Rabbi Yossi that you need both. Omar Mar said, "Lefichach matbilan ger b'Shabbos." Right? We're just repeating what we said a moment ago to analyze it better. You're allowed to be toivel a ger b'Shabbos. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the milah from yesterday already made him into a ger. Right? Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Take more pshita. That's pashut. Even Rabbi Yehuda b'chayil sagi. Since Rabbi Yehuda said that either milah alone or tefillah alone makes someone into a ger, heicha demol b'fanenu. If he mal in front of us, matbilim. So what's the chiddush? My lefichach. What is the lefichach? As if I'm now building a chiddush from Rabbi Yehuda. It's very obvious. If one or the other is enough, why should there be a problem? So come on, mal the table of Rabbi Yehuda. You might say, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, where one is enough, but tefillah ikr. But the main way to become a ger is tefillah. If you did Mila, okay, it's also good gears. But really, the most important thing to do is a tefillah. And the tefillah b'Shabbos loy, kamasak and gavra, and you're not allowed to tefillah on Shabbos because it's fixing the person, and therefore maybe we shouldn't allow the tefillah. Kamash v'lon, Rabbi Yehuda oiha boy. Rabbi Yehuda says either one is equal. Mila and tefillah are equal, and therefore once Mila was done, there's no reason whatsoever to do tefillah on top of it. The tefillah is completely redundant, and that's why you're allowed to let this person table. Rabbi Yosy Omer ein matpila. Rabbi Yosy says even if there was Mila already, you don't allow tefillah. Again, pshita. The kibbutz Omer Rabbi Yosy tarti ba'inan. Once we already know that Rabbi Yosy said you need both, well then tekuni gavra b'shabbaloi miskinina. You don't allow to do it. So why do I need it? The Bryson to tell me this extra piece of information that you don't let him table. That's what I'm about to tell me Rabbi Yosy Mila Iker. Maybe really Rabbi Yosy holds, even though he says you need both, but the main part of the gears is Mila. And in the case earlier, he required a new Mila because the Mila wasn't in front of us, and we're afraid it's not a good Mila. But in the second case, where we know the Mila before Shabbos was done properly, maybe maybe we'll let him table on Shabbos. You know why? Because really, the Tikkun Gavra heard already with the Mila. Kamash Rabbi Yosy tarti boy. Rabbi Yosy holds the two major components. It's not like the tefillah is agavorcha. They're both primary components, and therefore we wouldn't allow him to do any one of these components on Shabbos. Amar Rabba. Rabba said, there was a story that happened in front of Rabbi Chia bar Rebbe. Only one dayan was there. Rabbi Yosef Masni, Rabbi Yosef said, no, there were two dayanim over there. Rabbi Oshi bar Rebbe was there. Rabbi Safra Masni, Rabbi Safra said, no, there were three dayanim there. Rabbi Oshi bar Chia. So Rabbi Safra holds that there were three dayanim. The Ozer Lakamei, and in front of the three dayanim approached Ger Shemol V'Letam. A Ger who malid but didn't tell him. He approached his three dayanim. Amarle, they told him, now when did they approach? It was at nighttime. It wasn't on a Shabbos. It was in a regular nighttime. And they told him, Shehikan, please wait here, ad l'mocher, until tomorrow, not belinach, and we'll table you tomorrow to complete your ger. So Shmamina Tlas. From this story, we learn three important halachas. Shmamina ger tzarich shloisha. You see, at least according to Safra, that a ger needs three dayanim, and that's why I was emphasizing how Rab Safra learned that there were three dayanim there. You see that there are three dayanim. Ushmamina ein ger atshiyim v'yitbal. You see, you need both because they told him we need to wait till tomorrow to tell you. Ushmamina ein matpil ger b'layla. You see from here that you're not allowed to toivel a ger at night, and the Gemara is going to tell us in a moment why. Because it's considered a mishpat, it's considered a din, and you're not allowed to do mishpat din by night. So, well, it says shahi l'kan ad l'machar. So that's how we know they came by night. But that was the story. They came by night. So Zok to Gemara, V'nema, why didn't you learn something else from this? The name is Shmami Nanami by Inin Mumchim. Maybe you should bring a raya from here that you need Dayana Mumchim like these three Gedoyle Aylam. So Gemara Lab Davka. Dilma Dikloi. Really, any three people this could have happened with, but this is the story. It happened to have happened with this three. But Avada, you don't have a raya, you need Mumchim. Why does a ger need a bezin of three to proclaim him a ger? Because mishpat tzivbei, it says mishpat. Let's stop here because this Torah Rabban starts a new sugya, also Gishmak sugya. So stop here, Mishim tomorrow. We'll start here. That's him at 6:20. Have a wonderful yom. Very much. And what do you mean? He went and bought me a whole container of honey and a whole thing of lemon, so that I should have an unlimited supply.